Hey everybody, today I'm talking about my top 10 worker placement board games. So I actually made this list a few years ago now, however I thought it needed a bit of a revamp and wanted to kind of recalibrate my thoughts and give my definitive top 10. So before I get into the top 10 list, I just want to give a shout out to kienda.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer in the UK. Get some great games at some great prices, but let's get on to the list. So I want to make it very clear that these games aren't necessarily ranked in my order from my least favourite to my most favourite. I really wanted to put that emphasis on that worker placement part of the game and where I think that part of the game shines through the strongest. And most of these games do cater towards that medium to heavier weight Euro style game, so bear that in mind as well. But without further ado, let's get started on the list. At number 10, I have Memes, which I think is a criminally underrated game, one that really has faded into obscurity over the years, but I really think this one deserves a bit of a resurgence, and if you see this one out in the wild, I would encourage you to pick this one up. So this one is a game with a really cool theme, and I'm not normally a massive sucker for theme, but this one does it very well as you are running your own ant colony, and you're doing that through the worker placement mechanism by placing your tokens onto your player board, either creating new ants, you've got kind of exploring ants, you've got combat ants, you're trying to harvest food because at the end of each round you kind of have to feed your force of ants, otherwise you're going to suffer penalties. You're trying to upgrade your colony to get bigger benefits and to spread your pheromones faster, and also fighting for public objectives with the other players as well as giving sometimes giving workers up and getting more workers in as well. So you've got to have this constant juggling effect of keeping your colony thriving. This one has some really cool mechanisms, like I said, particularly that pheromone mechanism where a certain spot allows you to go venturing out onto the board, and you're navigating the terrain and you're landing on a certain spot and leaving your pheromones and collecting resources that way. So rather than the traditional worker placement formula by go here to get this resources, you really do have to invest in these spots, and it takes a bit longer to get them going. But I think it works extremely well. It's such a tight game with very little wriggle room in terms of making mistakes, but I really do think that adds to the enjoyment, and it keeps things tight and keeps things tense, and get that small margin for error can really be where you kind of hit or miss with this game. But such a well tight design, and I say maybe the reason why this one didn't make the upper echelons of the list is because a lot of the worker placement is kind of self-contained and you're not so much worried about what the other people are doing, because most of those spots are on your personal board rather than on a communal board, which of course where is a lot of the interaction normally shines through in worker placement games. But regardless of that, still a wonderful worker placement game. That is Memes at number 10. At number 9, I have another older game with Lancaster by Matthias Kramer. This one is set in England, and it has that more traditional worker placement feel to it as you're taking your workers, putting them onto the board and trying to hold that position, because sometimes people can knock you off by bidding more in terms of their worker strength, because all your workers in this game are depicted by these knights, and they range in value from strength 1 all the way to strength 4, and they're physically different as well, because your strength 4 workers are much chunkier, so you can look at a glance and see who's controlling that region and at what strength. But I love this jostling for position as you're claiming these different counties and cities on the board. And say I bid a 3, then it goes to my opponent and they can potentially knock me off by bidding 4 or boosting up their workers with these squires. And you're basically trying to control these regions not only to get the benefit on them, such as upgrading your knights or getting new knights into your fold so you've got more options, but also by claiming these nobles. And when you get these nobles, you're going to add them to your banquet table, and they are going to give you not only loads of points, but they're also going to give you a lot of say when it comes to a particular phase in the game when you vote for laws to either pass or vote for them to kind of go into power or not out of power, and you're using votes to do that. And of course, the more noble support you get, the more kind of stroke you have. Such a cool design. Again, I love that interaction in this game. It really tends to control those regions. There's also an area control part of the game where you're putting workers there in order to contribute to these battles, and the more you contribute, the more points you're going to get, or potentially you're going to suffer points if you don't contribute to these fights, through negative points. What a game this one is. I say the only reason this one isn't higher on the list is because I think as time's gone by, I think this one would really benefit from a revamped edition where some of the housekeeping niggles and things could be smoothed out a little bit. But the gameplay itself, and that worker placement part of the game, is up there with the best. So that is Lancaster at number 9. At number 8, I have Orléans. Now, Orléans, I suppose the first thing people take away from this game is that you might not think it's a worker placement game. You might think it more for its bag building part of the game. As you're collecting tokens and putting them into your bag, and each round you're drawing tokens out and putting them on different spots, an action board basically. But that for me is worker placement. You're taking that token out, you're putting it on a worker spot, and triggering that action to get benefits. However, a lot of these worker placement spots don't need maybe one particular worker. They might need several different workers, and once you trigger them, they're going to go back into your bag ready to be used again. However, they will let you kind of climb tracks and let you travel around a map and maybe pick up different resources and drop them off depending on if you've got the expansion or not. You can use it to invest in getting more workers, also like more things into your bag. So when you draw them out, you get more options and more flexibility. I love this idea of, should I trigger these things now or should I wait for them for the perfect time? I like the way that you have to dedicate things to certain action spots. And if you haven't fulfilled all that criteria, then they are potentially tied up for a few rounds until you get that final spot complete. I really do love this mechanism. There's so much tension in this game, as you really do have to know when to flip that switch in order to know when to start losing workers from your bag and adding them to a separate board to get quite strong bonuses for doing so. This game really does have it all. I think it's remarkably deep for how simple the rule set is. Again, just drawing workers from the bag, adding them to your board and potentially triggering those actions. But what a blast this one is. A real fun factor. I would say that the expansion for this game is mandatory. It's essential, the trade and intrigue expansion, to really take it to that next level. But regardless of that, the gameplay is so strong, and a big portion of that is because of that worker placement mechanism. Love this one. That is Orléans at number 8. At number 7, I have another game that's really flown under the radar maybe over the last year. This is a game called Fruticola. So Fruticola, again, a game that didn't get any fanfare whatsoever when it came out, despite being from some pretty popular designers. This one is a game about running a fruit orchard, or trying to collect fruit and to convert those fruit into jams to sell them at a market. It has this commodity speculation and kind of a dynamic market to it, as fruit is constantly fluctuating in price. Sometimes it goes up in value, sometimes it goes down, depending on the supply and demand. But it all goes back to a simple worker placement user interface. As you have two different types of workers. You've got workers and you've got farmers, and each of those has their own strengths and benefits. So when you go to certain spots, you might harvest fruit faster if you use a particular worker, or some might give you more power in terms of converting fruit into jams a lot quicker and more efficiently. But just before you even start placing the workers onto the board, you have to make some quite crucial decisions, because you have a hand of cards, and those cards are going to dictate which workers you have for that following round. So you could have, say, 3 farmers, or you could have maybe 3 farmers and 2 workers in any different orders. And the order is important because you have to place them in that order, which could mean you change your priorities and want to do things at certain speeds. And also each card has a initiative value based on it as well, so that if you play a particular card with a low value, you'll likely get to those spots first and claim that spot before the other players do. Layers upon layers of strategy here, despite being a medium light Euro. I love the commodity speculation, love the potential for upgrading your engine in this game, as you can collect these tiles which let you do game-breaking things. Very few spots, but I don't think that's a negative for the game. It just really does ramp up that tension. And I just love those extra wrinkles in terms of that card play, in terms of being restricted in the order you play those workers. And that really does, again, add that tension to that worker placement part of the game in order to get there before your opponents do, to get bigger dividends. Wonderfully designed game. I think one of the biggest issues with this game is its production. It does certainly feel cheap. The cardboard is rubbish, some design issues, but the gameplay itself is rock solid and amongst one of the best worker placement games that I've played. And for an hour experience, I think that is 2 thumbs up from me. So that is Fruticola at number 7. At number 6, I have Barrage. So this is pretty much polar opposite to a game like Fruticola. This one is an industrious, a massive sprawling game, as you are trying to be these energy tycoons, trying to convert water into energy. And you're doing this through this dam system, as this board is made up of this, basically a mountainscape, and then it goes into the kind of plains, and you're trying to collect water as it flows down this board, capture it in dams, convert that into energy through these conduits, and to generate energy to get points, etc. But the way this game operates is, of course, using a worker placement mechanism. And I love the simplicity of how those worker placement spots work in relation to the depth and scale of the game, because this is a pretty involved, a pretty cutthroat, confrontational, and just a grand game in general. But actually explaining it in terms of its worker placement system actually does help massively, I think. So all you're going to do on this game is you're going to take workers and put them on these different spots, which will either let you convert water into energy, they'll let you build new dams and new conduits, new power stations. But when you build these things, you're actually tying up resources for a prolonged period of time. So you're not actually spending resources, you're just dedicating them or tying them up for a certain amount of time. And one of those worker placement spots is to accelerate that to make sure that you get those resources back quicker than you normally would do, which I think is fantastic. And I love the fact that the way this game is balanced in terms of, there's generally quite a bit of flexibility in getting spaces in the action you want. But if you're not quick enough, you might have to end up spending more workers and of course not being as efficient for doing so, and it costing you money as well. So you generally do have options here, and you're not so strictly locked out of these worker placement spots. But being such an economic game, every coin can be massive. So I really do like the way this game is balanced. I like the way it's boiled down into the simple systems, but still having a ton of depth and a ton of player interaction. One of my favourite games of all time, that is Barrage at number 6. At number 5, I have Underwater Cities by Vladimir Suki. This one is pretty much the definitive engine building game. You have so much going on here in terms of constantly getting upgrades for this and for that, making things cheaper, giving yourself unique abilities, lots of different things, anything you can think of relating to engine building, this game delivers. And of course, the key system in the game is worker placement, as you're taking your player marker, adding it to a certain spot on the board and blocking other players from doing so. But I love the fact that this is taken to the next level because each worker placement spot goes hand in hand with some card play, because each spot is related to a different colour, and when you place that worker down you can choose to play the matching coloured card and get a follow-up bonus as well. And it's cool because the more powerful worker placement spots kind of go hand in hand with the weaker cards and vice versa. So it really is about how you're going to manage those actions and how to manage your hand accordingly, because you might not want to get rid of cards when you go to those certain spots. So it really is about what's going to be the kind of net gain and what you're going to do. But this is a game about building an underwater city, as you probably explained, or probably expect. You're building kind of upgrades, you're getting more income round and round, and just trying to generate a points engine. But again, I haven't seen that system used before. Whenever you go to a worker placement spot, you can play a follow-up card and get that bonus as well, which adds a whole new dimension to the game, and it just works so well. So that is Underwater Cities at number 5. At number 4, I have Marco Polo 2 in Service of the Khan. So this is a game that uses dice as workers. So at the start of the round, you're going to roll, I believe it's 5 or 6 dice, and then you are going to dedicate them to spots on the board, and the pit values of those dice is going to be quite important, because they are going to let you kind of travel around faster or let you collect different resources, because some spots require higher pit values than others to go to. I like the tenseness of getting places before other people, because again, traveling is like a really valuable action, and if you really want to make the most of that, then you're going to have to get there first. And if you go after it, or if you follow another player by taking the same action, sometimes you have to pay a fee for doing so, which can of course add more player interaction to the game and make you race to those spots before the other people do. Some spots are open, so anybody can go to. Some spots are purely locked for one person. So all this just adds that worker placement tension that I love, where you want to be the first to do something, but prioritizing things is where the strategy and the decision space comes into the game. I love the way that parts of this game go hand in hand, where you need to collect resources with your workers in order to fulfill these contracts, but you need to travel in order to get the contracts in the first place. So it really is a well-balanced game that you need to try everything. And I think that's probably one of the biggest parts or biggest reasons why Marco Polo 2 is on this list rather than the original. I still love the original. It's a bit tighter, which maybe it's a positive or a negative for you. But I love all these things this game has to offer. Uses dice so well. Some good mitigation on that dice roll as well, as you can spend camels to re-roll or flip them over. And I also love this idea that you can have these unique player powers which are really strong in what they do and make you very different to your opponents, which of course will kind of put you on a path in which strategy you want to follow. So yeah, really well-rounded Euro. In fact, one of the most well-rounded Euros I own, I think, in terms of being there's nothing wrong with it at all. It's just a fun experience that uses dice and worker placement at its core. So that is Marco Polo 2 in Service of the Khan. At number 3, I have Lorenzo Il Magnifico. So this is another worker placement game, of course, which uses dice as one of the key influencing factors. However, this game you're not rolling dice and allocating them to different spots. You are rolling a bunch of dice, and then those colours of those dice are going to correspond to a worker which you have. And each player is going to have a worker of those matching types, and the pip value of that dice is going to determine the strength of that worker. So say the white die rolled 3, that means everybody's white worker is strength 3. And you're going to use those workers in order to collect new cards, in order to score points or give you engine building abilities. You can boost them up with these servants, and you're all trying to build this kind of engine or row of cards where you go to a certain other engine, another worker placement spot, and you can run that engine from left to right and generate a whole bunch of resources at once. And the longer you neglect these things, you can take these kind of these hindrances to make your dice less potent, or your workers less potent when you take them. So getting places first is so important. Love all the different things you can do in this game. So many different paths to victory, loads of different engine building potential, and it's just a really satisfying game. And I love that worker placement system where you don't know what your workers are going to be, strength they're going to be this round. Maybe you didn't build up enough servants to boost you up, but everybody is singing from the same hymn sheet, so luck is not really a factor. So I really do love the way that works. So an amazing Euro. That is Lorenzo Il Magnifico at number 3. At number 2, I have Keyflower. So Keyflower, certainly one of the most interactive games that I've ever played. This is worker placement mixed with almost auction / bidding, as you're trying to use these tiles, but also bid on these tiles to add to your personal town. And when you use these, the way you use any action in this game is based on meeples. So I believe you've got 4 different coloured meeples. You've got red, your blues, your greens, and your yellows. And but every one of those colours isn't kind of relating to a particular player. I could have some yellows, this player could have some yellows, and so on. But as soon as you either bid for these tiles to add to your player board, then that particular colour that you've used to do that is going to lock it in for all the other players as well. So if I've bid, say, 1 yellow to take this tile, then all the other players can only bid and compete with yellows as well. However, you can also straight up use those tiles before they're even claimed as the worker placement spot to either get you resources or convert resources to others or to move around your map. But I love the fact that when you use those worker placement spots, if somebody bids it and wins that bid, they're going to get all the workers that have been bid on them and take them into their fold for the next round. So it really does have this free-flowing economy, and you've got to be very careful about when you use things and how you use them, because it could really be benefiting other players. And as you develop your town as the game goes on, you can either use your workers or your meeples or your own player board in order to get those benefits and make sure that you keep them in your area and keep them to be able to use again and again. Or you can actually use other people's tiles, which they've claimed previously, but bearing in mind that once you use their tiles, they are going to claim that worker for the next round. So I love that economy. So much depth in the interaction here, and that worker placement is so strong, and it ties and synergizes so well with that bidding system. A brilliant worker placement game, one of the best. Number 2 of all time, that is Keyflower. And finally, my number 1 worker placement game is TZOLK'IN, the Mayan calendar. So for me, this one, despite being one of the first worker placement games I ever played, is still my favourite of that particular genre. And the reason for that one is this one really does take the genre and turn it on its head, adds a whole new dimension to the game, because not only are you kind of being wary about when you're taking workers off the board and putting them on the board, but the timing of that comes into play as well, because when you're placing these workers on the board, you're placing them on these gears, and the longer you leave them on these gears, they're going to start charging up round after round and getting bigger and bigger rewards. However, you are forced to either place new workers or take them off the board each round. And pacing yourself and kind of lining the timings up is really where this game does shine, because sometimes you might think, I'll place this worker here, and then that'll be the end of my turn. It'll rotate once, and then I'll place one over here, and then it'll do the same. And then by the time it gets to your 3rd or 4th turn, you might be ready to take this one off, which will correspond to this action here, and take a big, powerful action all at once, all based on that strategy and the way you chronologically place things on the board. So clever. So again, a whole new dynamic to the game. No other game has even tried to replicate this, which is really surprising to me. And because for me, that mechanism has so much scope. But that worker placement system of just put things on the board or take them off the board, and how you're going to do that, not leaving yourself backed into a corner so you're forced to take things off or forced to put them on, is just phenomenal. And it's on top of that, I suppose the underlying factor is pretty standard stuff. You know, you're just collecting resources, buying buildings, collecting these crystal skulls and depositing on a different part of the map to get points. So it really is a kind of point salad engine building style game, but tied together with that gear worker placement system just takes this game to a whole new dimension, and it is utterly mind-blowing about how well this game is put together. So that is my number one worker placement game of all time, TZOLK'IN, the Mayan calendar. So I really hope you've enjoyed this top 10. It's been a while since I've done one, and I always enjoy doing top 10. So if you have enjoyed the list, please hit like and subscribe to my channel, and check out my other videos too. Additionally, let me know what your favourite worker placement game is, and I'll be sure to reply to your comment in the comments below. And of course, as always, be sure to check out hienda.co.uk for some great board games in the UK. So for everyone else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board.